After a lifetime of being ignored, she finally found peace at her wedding until the texts leaked. What her mom planned to do that day will leave you speechless. I didn't expect my wedding day to be peaceful, not after a lifetime of being shoved to the side, but when I looked out at the crowd and saw empty chairs where my parents and brother should have been, my chest didn't ache like I thought it would. It finally felt like I could breathe. Growing up in the suburbs just outside Chicago, I used to believe we were a regular middle-class family, 2 parents, 2 kids, a decent backyard, and occasional road trips to Wisconsin or Indiana during summer break. But that illusion shattered around the time I turned 9, the exact moment my younger brother Neil got diagnosed with asthma after one mild breathing episode at soccer practice. From that point forward, the dynamic in our home tilted completely in his direction. What started as reasonable concern turned into full-blown obsession. My folks acted like they were raising a porcelain doll who might shatter at the first hint of pollen or mild breeze. Me? I was the afterthought. Forgotten during dinners, missed at recitals, pushed to the background like I was part of the wallpaper. I remember this one night, crystal clear, age 12, middle school winter concert. I practiced a complex piano solo for months. My music teacher had picked me specifically, said I played with the kind of emotion you couldn't teach. I was nervous but proud, hoping to see my folks smiling in the front row like they promised that morning. Instead, an empty bench sat where they should have been, and when I got home later that night, my grandma told me Neil had another flare-up. Except, she also said he was playing video games when she called. That pattern repeated over and over. 16th birthday, they took the car with my cake in it to urgent care because Neil had the sniffles. High school graduation? I was valedictorian, 430 students, and I stood at the podium alone because Neil had a panic attack over finals that weren't even that week. Every time I achieved something, my parents had an excuse not to be there. And always, the excuse wore Neil's name. College was a grind. While my friends got help with tuition, I worked graveyard shifts at a diner, studied during slow hours, and took naps in the campus library between lectures. I graduated top of my chemical engineering class while Neil got a full ride from my parents' college fund just in case his medical expenses came up. By then, all he needed was a simple inhaler he barely used, but that didn't stop them from babying him like he was still fragile. The final straw? My master's graduation. They swore they'd be there, front row, promised dinner after. Then I got a text that morning. Neil has a migraine, we can't make it. That night, he posted party photos from his buddy's apartment. Laughing, beers in hand. My cap and gown sat folded on my desk while my heart shattered. Years later, I met Jamie. His family celebrated everything, birthdays, promotions, even silly little wins like finally assembling IKEA furniture without extra screws left over. They welcomed me in like I belonged, sent flowers when I published research, framed my paper, showed up to my events like they were cheering for a hometown hero. It made me realize just how starved I'd been for that kind of love. So when Jamie and I got engaged, I sat on the decision to invite my parents and Neil like it was a ticking bomb in my chest. I imagined my vows being interrupted by a dramatic attack or my mom slipping out mid-toast because Neil wasn't feeling right. The more I pictured it, the more certain I became I wasn't letting that happen again. We planned a beautiful, intimate ceremony, 80 people, most of them Jamie's relatives and our closest friends. I invited my extended family but swore them to secrecy. I didn't want drama. I wanted peace. And for the first time in my life, that's exactly what I got. Jamie's dad walked me down the aisle. His mom helped me get ready. His sisters stood by my side in matching dresses, wiping tears and whispering encouragement. My grandparents danced with me, their pride beaming brighter than any chandelier in the room. And those empty seats? They weren't sad. They were freedom. The morning after the wedding, I woke up next to Jamie in a soft bed of scattered rose petals and sunlight streaming through the hotel curtains, thinking, maybe, just maybe, this is what it feels like when you're finally free. No guilt, no tension, just the quiet warmth of a man who chose me, a family who showed up, and a day that, for once, belonged to me. But peace has a funny way of never lasting long when your past refuses to stay buried. By the time we got back from our mini honeymoon, my phone had gone from blissfully quiet to absolutely lit up, dozens of missed calls, voicemail bubbles, and text previews full of words like selfish, heartless, and how could you? My cousin had uploaded a few wedding photos, nothing dramatic, just a shot of Jamie and me under the arch, laughing during the vows. And that was all it took to light the fuse. My mom's first message came in fast, a voicemail where her voice cracked between fake tears and bitter rage. I can't believe you'd leave us out of your wedding, she said. We're your family, for God's sake. You've always resented your brother just because he needed more support than you. That wasn't his fault. Then came my dad, less emotional, more indignant. This was a betrayal, he barked. You humiliated us in front of the whole family. Everyone's asking where we were. Do you enjoy embarrassing your own parents? Neil's message didn't even try to mask his guilt. Wow, it started. Just one word. Then, real mature. You're gonna regret this when I end up in the hospital from the stress you've caused. That was rich, considering he had just posted pictures of himself grinning with a beer in one hand at a Cubs game the day of our wedding. I didn't respond. Not at first. But I couldn't stop thinking about everything. And I'll admit, for a moment I wondered, was I cruel? Was I that petty? Had I become the cold, vengeful person they always accused me of being? Jamie's mom, God bless her, saw me spiraling and decided to step in. She's been a pediatric nurse for over 3 decades, specializing in respiratory conditions. So one afternoon, she picked up the phone and called my mother directly, trying to extend an olive branch. Calm, kind, professional, she simply said that she'd love to find some common ground, maybe plan a dinner or post-wedding gathering. But then, gently, she mentioned something that had been gnawing at all of us for years. Neil's lifestyle didn't match his supposed condition. He goes hiking, she said. He plays in 2 rec leagues, goes to concerts, parties late, drinks regularly. For someone with chronic health issues, he's surprisingly resilient. My mother didn't take that well. She hung up immediately. Then, like clockwork, she called Jamie's sister, not me, not the one she was angry with, but his sister, to complain that Jamie's mom was interfering in things that don't concern her. The manipulation was so transparent it made my stomach churn. That call unlocked a memory I hadn't thought about in years. I was 17. Homecoming night. I had saved every tip from my part-time job bussing tables just to buy this one dress, a deep green, floor-length thing I'd dreamed about for weeks. I was nominated for homecoming court and I wanted to feel beautiful even just for one night. But just as I was zipping it up, Neil doubled over in the living room, groaning about stomach pain. My parents flew into panic mode, whisking him off to the ER, leaving me standing in front of the mirror alone, dress half-zipped, hair half-curled, waiting for headlights that never came back. They told me it might be appendicitis. They told me it was serious. You know what the diagnosis was? Gas. Neil ate too fast and had trapped air in his stomach. They gave him some over-the-counter meds and that was that. By the time they got home, it was after midnight. My dress was still hanging off my shoulder, the tag still attached. I never wore it again. That night came back like a wave crashing over me. All the birthdays ruined, the ceremonies missed, the promotions dismissed because Neil wasn't feeling well. It wasn't just favoritism, it was a pattern. A game. And I was always the losing player. Then, like a sledgehammer to the chest, Kay, my cousin who had always kept her distance but showed up for the wedding, called me. I didn't want to say anything before she started, hesitant, but Neil told me once, years ago, that he faked it. Most of it. What do you mean? I asked, not fully believing what I was hearing. She sighed. He was drunk at a family barbecue. Told me he used to make stuff up just to get attention. Especially when you had something important going on. Said he got a kick out of it. Watching how fast your parents would drop everything to run to him. It became a game. I didn't speak. I just let that truth hang in the air like poison slowly leaking from a cracked bottle. And then she dropped the final bomb. She had screenshots, texts from my mom the week before the wedding, talking about how concerned she was that Neil might have an episode during the ceremony. She even floated the idea of him having a bad spell so they could remind everyone what really matters. They had planned it. They hadn't even been invited and they were already scheming to sabotage the day. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there, staring at the wall, realizing I had been right all along and that somehow that felt worse than being wrong. You ever get that moment where the truth finally shows up, not as a shining sword or some relief-bringing angel, but like a slow, burning wind that scorches every good memory you thought you had? That's what those texts did to me. I stared at my phone for what felt like hours after Kay sent them, screenshots from my own mother, not just worrying Neil might feel overwhelmed during the wedding, but strategizing how to use it. She mentioned maybe having him feel unwell during the ceremony to draw attention back to what really matters. That's how she phrased it, like my vows and my marriage were just distractions from the only person worth caring about. I'd spent my entire life thinking I was being dramatic, ungrateful, even cold. Turns out I was just their unwanted witness. They weren't neglecting me by accident. It was deliberate. It was engineered. And worst of all, they saw nothing wrong with it. That night, I showed Jamie everything. The texts, Kay's call summary, the memories unraveling in my mind one by one. He read it all in silence, then pulled me close and whispered, "You were never crazy. You were never wrong." And still, I couldn't stop shaking. The next day, Kay called again, her voice softer this time. She said she had shared the screenshots with a few other family members, the ones who had been calling me selfish, dramatic, and cold-hearted since the wedding. She told them to read everything before judging me. Most were stunned. Some apologized immediately. One uncle even admitted, honestly, we all saw something was off, but your parents made it hard to speak up. Kay confessed she'd kept quiet for years because she didn't want to cause trouble between siblings. I told her it wasn't her fault. I meant it. But inside, I couldn't help feeling like the silence had been just as heavy as the lies. That afternoon, I sat by the window with a notebook and just started writing down every major moment from my life that had been derailed by Neil's health emergencies. My piano solo, my 16th birthday, my valedictorian speech, my scholarship program, my master's graduation, my homecoming dance. I counted 9 events before I stopped. 9 major moments where I was supposed to be seen. 9 times I got erased. And now on my wedding day, the one day I had hoped would finally belong to me, they had been planning to do it again. I felt sick. I tried reaching out to Neil, thinking maybe he'd come clean now that the truth was out. I sent him a message. I know what you told Kay. I know about the texts. I'm not mad. I just want to talk. No reply. Not that night, not the next day, not even that week. Kay said she confronted him, showed him the screenshots, and told him how much it had hurt me. She said he got defensive at first, then angry, then stormed off saying, of course you'd take her side. No apology. No explanation. Just deflection, like always. Jamie told me to let it go. You gave them a chance, he said. It's not on you anymore. He was right. But it still stung like hell. His family, meanwhile, had gone out of their way to lift me up. A week after the wedding, his mom hosted a little backyard celebration for the relatives who couldn't make the ceremony. There were string lights, simple snacks, a homemade banner that said we love you both, and this easy, peaceful air that made my shoulders drop for the first time in weeks. But what really got me, what broke me in the best way, was when Jamie's dad stood up with a toast. He didn't talk about unity or forgiveness or any of that fake family sentiment. He talked about me. He listed my accomplishments, from my degrees to my research to the way I carried myself with strength and compassion even when no one was watching. He said, we're not just lucky to have her in the family, we're better because she's in it. I almost couldn't breathe. Because no one, not once in my entire life, had ever said something like that to me, much less in front of others. Later that night, I stepped away for a moment and called my aunt, my mom's older sister. She'd been critical when I first told her my parents weren't invited, said I was causing division. But something had changed since then. She answered on the second ring and said, before I could even speak, I owe you an apology. We talked for over an hour. I told her about the texts, about Kay's confession, about how so many moments of my life had been chipped away piece by piece. She didn't deny any of it. In fact, she added her own stories, times she'd seen my mom brush past my achievements at family events or shut me down when I tried to speak. I never knew how deep it went, she said. But I do now. That call didn't fix everything. But it felt like the first time someone on that side of the family saw me for real. After the call, I went back to the celebration, sat next to Jamie, and for once, I didn't feel like I was taking up too much space. I belonged. And for the first time, that felt louder than their silence. A few days after the backyard celebration, I found myself sitting alone on our balcony, staring out over the street like I was waiting for something, maybe an apology, maybe an explanation, maybe just something to make it all make sense. But none of that came. What did come was another voicemail from my father. His tone had changed, less barking, more wounded. You tore this family apart, he said, as if I had lit the match instead of simply walking away from the fire they kept feeding. Neil's health is worse now, he's not eating, not sleeping. Are you happy now? The guilt hit like a wave, but this time it didn't pull me under. Because I knew the truth. I'd seen the pictures from that same day, Neil laughing at a baseball game with friends, drink in hand, not a care in the world. Same as always. That was the part that stuck in my throat, not just that they lied, but that they kept lying, even after getting caught. Even after proof was staring them in the face. Jamie's mother tried once more to bridge the gap, gently offering to set up a meeting or family dinner. My mom never even responded. Instead, she called Jamie's sister to complain, again, that her family was meddling, that we were trying to villainize Neil, and that my wedding was never about love, just revenge. That was the moment I stopped wondering if they'd ever come around. They wouldn't. Because to them I wasn't their daughter anymore, I was the enemy. So I muted their numbers, set up filters on my email, and for the first time since I was a kid, gave myself permission to choose peace over obligation. But even with all that, the memories kept bubbling up, moments I had stuffed down so deep they barely felt real anymore. Like the scholarship I had earned in junior year for a summer science program at a prestigious university. It was supposed to be a turning point, a chance to work with real researchers to finally see what my future could look like. I was ecstatic. Until Neil had a flare-up the week I was supposed to leave. Nothing serious, just more of the same vague breathing problems that never seemed to come with any test results or diagnosis, but it was enough. My parents told me it wouldn't be right to leave the family during a health crisis. They told me family sticks together. So I stayed. The bus left without me. The spot went to someone else. And no one mentioned it again. I didn't realize how much I'd buried that until I said it out loud to Jamie one night, and his eyes filled with this quiet fury I'd never seen in him before. "You realize that's not normal, right?" he said. "That's not love. That's control." I didn't respond. I just nodded. Because deep down, I knew he was right. But what broke me again, what cracked open that final piece of hope I didn't know I was still holding onto, was what Kay said during our next phone call. "Hey," she started, her voice hesitant, "I think there's something you should see." She had just come back from visiting her parents, and while helping her mom organize some old storage boxes, she stumbled on something, an envelope with my name on it. Inside? Letters. Old, folded, yellowed pages I had written when I was younger, birthday cards, thank you notes, even a Father's Day letter I'd written my dad when I was 12, thanking him for staying up late to help me with a science project. I remembered writing that letter. I remembered slipping it under his office door, hoping it would mean something. He never mentioned it. But there it was, in a stack of unopened letters sitting in a dusty box like forgotten homework. None of them had been opened. None of them read. Not a single one. "I don't know if it helps," Kay said, "but I thought you should know. It wasn't that you didn't try. You did. They just didn't care enough to see it." I sat with that for a long time. I held those old letters in my hands later that week after Kay mailed them to me, and I stared at my own handwriting, trying to remember the version of me who still believed I could win their love if I just tried hard enough. It hurt. But it also helped me let go of the guilt. Because I finally understood, I didn't fail them. They failed me. And sometimes, the only way to heal from being unseen is to stop chasing people who close their eyes every time you speak. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon when the unexpected happened, the kind of day that feels so ordinary you'd never expect it to carry something heavy. I was walking home from work, groceries in one hand and my phone buzzing like usual in the other, when I saw the email. Subject: "I'm sorry." From Neil. I stood there on the sidewalk, wind biting through my jacket, just staring at it for a minute, afraid to open it. Afraid it would be another guilt trip, another performance. But my curiosity cracked the door before I could stop myself. And what I read, it didn't feel like Neil. It felt like a stranger who had finally stepped outside the bubble my parents built for him and realized what it meant to breathe on his own. He started by apologizing. Not for missing the wedding or for the texts, though he did mention those, but for everything. For the years of manipulation. For pretending to be sick when I had big moments. For not stopping our parents when he knew exactly what they were doing. He said he had started therapy a few months back, ironically at our mom's insistence after the wedding fallout, and it forced him to look at himself in a way he'd never done before. He wrote that growing up, the only time he felt important was when he was unwell, and after a while, pretending became easier than facing the silence of being ordinary. He said my parents trained him to believe he was only worthy of love when he was falling apart, and worse, that my accomplishments were threats to his place in the family. He said he was sorry for the homecoming night. He remembered the dress, remembered me sitting on the edge of my bed with my shoes on, asking if they'd be back in time. He said he knew it wasn't real pain that night, just a bad stomachache from eating too fast, but the attention was real and he wanted it more than he cared about what it cost me. He said that moment haunts him. And then he said something I didn't expect. He wrote, "They hurt both of us. Me, by making illness the only way I could matter. You, by making your success invisible. I'm trying to break out of that now, but I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that you weren't wrong. You never were." I didn't cry right away. I just sat down on a bench with that email still open, staring at the words like they might vanish if I blinked. Because for the first time in nearly 2 decades, Neil didn't sound like the center of a pity story. He sounded like someone waking up. When I told Jamie, he didn't react much. Just nodded and said, "I'm glad he finally saw it. But don't feel like you owe him anything." And I didn't. Not really. But I responded. I told Neil I appreciated his words. I told him I hoped he kept going to therapy. I told him I didn't hate him, but I couldn't promise I was ready to rebuild anything. Not yet. Maybe someday. But not now. He replied once more, saying he understood. Said he was looking for a full-time job and planning to move out of the apartment our parents paid for. Said he wanted to learn how to stand on his own for the first time in his life. He didn't ask me for anything. He didn't justify what he'd done. And that alone made it the most honest thing he'd ever sent me. Of course, my parents found out because Neil, in a moment of poor judgment or trust, had left his email account open on the shared home computer. They read everything. Within days, they flipped. Threatened to cut him off financially. Told him he was being manipulated by me. My mom texted Jamie's sister, again, ranting about how I was driving a wedge between her children. My dad left me a voicemail saying I was tearing the family apart and that Neil's condition was worsening because of the stress I was causing. But Neil didn't back down this time. He texted me later saying he was looking for a cheaper apartment and applying to jobs outside the city. He said he didn't want to live under their roof anymore, not if it meant returning to who he used to be. And for the first time, I felt something toward him that I hadn't felt in years. Hope. Hope that maybe he really meant it. Hope that maybe I hadn't lost my brother completely, just the version of him who needed me to disappear in order to shine. Jamie was cautious, of course. Protective. He suggested if Neil ever wanted to meet, we'd do it in a public place. No expectations. No big reconciliations. Just a conversation between two people who had been stuck in the same broken story for too long. And I agreed. Because something inside me had changed since reading that email. I wasn't chasing their approval anymore. I wasn't grieving a family that never truly existed. I was just walking forward, piece by piece, toward a version of my life where my worth wasn't up for debate. And for the first time, I was okay not looking back. We picked a coffee shop just outside the city, quiet, tucked into the corner of a tree-lined street where no one from our old life was likely to walk by. I chose it deliberately. I needed this to feel like neutral ground, not a memory-laced battlefield. Jamie came with me, but he waited in the car, not out of distrust, but support. If you need an out, he said, I'll be 20 feet away. That mattered more than I knew how to say. I got there early. Neil showed up right on time. When he walked in, he looked different, not just older, but heavier somehow, like the truth had finally settled on his shoulders and he was still getting used to carrying it. He didn't smile, didn't wave. Just gave me a slow nod and sat across from me like someone who wasn't sure if they were allowed to be there. There was a long silence at first. Just the sound of coffee grinders and hushed conversation. We both stared at our drinks like they had something wise to say. Then he said, "You look happy." And I said, "I am." He nodded, eyes down. "Good. You deserve to be." It wasn't awkward. It wasn't warm. It was somewhere in between, a stretch of unfamiliar space we were both trying to cross without slipping. I asked about his job search. He told me he'd landed a part-time marketing assistant gig at a small startup. Said it wasn't much, but it paid enough to keep him fed, and more importantly, it wasn't under our parents' roof. They told me I was being ungrateful, he said. Said I was choosing pride over family. But honestly, I think I'm finally figuring out what family is supposed to feel like. I didn't answer right away. He added, "I'm not looking for you to fix anything. I just needed you to know I see it now. All of it." And then gently, almost like he wasn't sure he was allowed to say it, "You were always the strong one, even when it looked like I was." That hit harder than I expected. We sat for over an hour, talking about things we'd never said when we were kids. About how he used to watch me through the cracked door when I stayed up late doing homework on the kitchen floor. How he'd hear our parents say I was too intense or too focused, like ambition was some kind of character flaw. I told him about how lonely it felt to have achievements that no one clapped for. How I used to pretend my stuffed animals were an audience after winning science fairs. How every compliment from a teacher made me feel guilty, like I was stealing attention I hadn't earned. He didn't argue. He didn't minimize it. He just said, "I'm sorry I didn't see it then." Eventually, we got up to leave. He asked if we could meet again sometime, no pressure, just maybe grab lunch, keep talking. I told him maybe. And I meant it. But I also told him it had to be on new terms. No secrets. No guilt trips. No pretending things hadn't happened. He nodded again and said, "I want to know who you really are now. Not the version I was taught to resent." That was the moment I realized the gap between us might still be wide, but at least now we were both standing on the edge, looking across instead of turning away. When I got back to the car, Jamie didn't ask questions. He just reached over, laced his fingers through mine, and waited. Later that night, I got a message from my mom. A long, emotional rant about betrayal. About how Neil had turned against the family and I had poisoned him with my bitterness. She said she hoped I was proud of myself for destroying what was left of our household. I didn't respond. I didn't even flinch. Because for the first time in my life, I realized I wasn't part of that house anymore. I had built my own with walls made of boundaries, a foundation of truth, and people who chose me because of who I was, not what I could give them. A week later, Neil texted me again. They told me they're cutting me off. I told them to go ahead. It hurts, but it feels clean. Like I finally took my name back. I told him I understood. Because that's what it felt like for me too. Not a win. Not revenge. Just release. We were packing boxes the night the past came knocking, literal cardboard boxes with labels like kitchen stuff and winter coats, because Jamie and I were moving to Boston in 2 weeks for his new job at a research institute. I'd landed a role at a biotech company across town, better pay, cleaner slate, and far, far away from the place I'd spent most of my life trying to escape. But peace never comes without one last test, does it? The doorbell rang just after 9:30. We weren't expecting anyone. Jamie froze. I set down the stack of picture frames I'd been bubble wrapping and walked slowly to the door. Through the peephole, I saw them, my parents. Both of them. My mother's face was red, whether from tears or rage, I couldn't tell. My father stood with his arms crossed, expressionless except for that cold weight behind his eyes I'd come to know too well. I didn't open the door. I cracked the window near the living room just enough to hear their voices. I didn't want confrontation. I wanted boundaries. But they weren't there to respect anything. They were there to demand. Neil's gone, my mom said. He won't answer our calls. He says it's your fault. He says he doesn't trust us, my dad added. He used to be a good kid. Now he's twisted. I kept my voice calm. He's an adult. He's allowed to make his own decisions. You're ruining this family, my mother snapped. First the wedding, then turning your brother against us, now you're running away across the country? Is that what you want? To destroy everything. It wasn't yelling. It wasn't sobbing. It was a performance. Every word calibrated for guilt. I told them what I had told them 100 times in my mind, but never out loud. I didn't destroy this family. You broke it when you chose one child over the other. Repeatedly. Relentlessly. I just finally stopped pretending that was okay. My father stepped forward, and I saw it. The same glare he used to give me when I was a kid asking for help on a school project that was due the next day. That look that said, "How dare you need something?" He said, "We were good parents. You had a roof, food, education. You gave me scraps." I said flat. When it was convenient. When Neil didn't need something. My mother's voice cracked. "You're cruel." And I don't know what came over me, but I leaned out the window just enough for her to hear this clearly. You don't get to call me cruel after missing every single thing that mattered to me. After making me watch my milestones become footnotes to Neil's imaginary illnesses. After planning to ruin my wedding day before you were even invited. That was when my dad's mask slipped. You think you're better than us now? You think your job, your husband, your little Boston escape makes you superior? I shook my head. No, but it makes me free. And I won't trade that for a fake apology or a front row seat in your circus. I closed the window, locked it, sat down next to Jamie and didn't say a word for a long while. They didn't knock again. They didn't shout. They just stood there for a while, probably hoping I'd come back out, probably still believing they had some kind of power over me. But they were wrong. Because here's the truth. When you stop needing your parents' love, their guilt stops working. Their threats lose weight. Their absence stops feeling like a wound and starts feeling like a blessing. A few days later, I got one more email from my mom. No subject. Just a short message. When Neil ends up in the hospital again, and you're not there to help, I hope you can live with that. I didn't respond, because I had already made peace with something they never would. I couldn't save someone who didn't want to be saved, and I sure as hell wasn't going to bleed anymore for people who treated my life like a sideshow. Boston became more than a move. It became the symbol of everything I had fought for: privacy, healing, self-worth. The night before we left, Jamie and I stood outside our nearly empty apartment, arms around each other, boxes stacked neatly behind us. I looked at him and said, "You think I'm doing the right thing?" He smiled. "I think for the first time in your life, you're doing it for you." And I believed him. Boston welcomed us with snow in April, just enough to remind us that new beginnings still come with a chill. But it was ours. The apartment was small. The moving boxes were stacked high, and the heat groaned like an old man climbing stairs. But I loved every inch of it because no part of it carried their fingerprints. There were no ghost memories hiding in the drywall. No echoes of slammed doors or disappointed sighs. Just blank walls, fresh space, and the quiet promise of starting from zero with someone who looked at me like I wasn't too much to love. Jamie and I settled in like two survivors learning how to breathe again. Our routines became gentle rituals. Morning coffee on the fire escape, sticky notes on the fridge reminding each other of little joys, long walks through the commons at dusk. No drama, no tightrope walking, just quiet. And God, I hadn't realized how much I needed that kind of silence until I finally had it. Neil emailed me a few weeks after we moved. He'd found a full-time job, real salary, real hours, real independence. Said he was renting a one-bedroom in a not-so-great part of town. But it was his. He sounded proud. Nervous but proud. He told me our parents had officially cut him off. Said they'd been alternating between furious texts and tearful voicemails, claiming I had brainwashed him. I told him to block them. He said he already had. It was strange, watching him go through the same process I had, only a few months behind. Like he was walking the same road, stepping over the same cracks. But this time, he had someone up ahead warning him where not to trip. He asked if he could visit us in Boston someday. Just as a brother. Not looking to fix anything. Just be part of my world if I'd let him. I said yes. Not immediately, but someday. I didn't tell Jamie until later that night, mostly because I wasn't sure how I felt about it myself. Jamie didn't hesitate. He just nodded and said, "You don't have to know right now. Just keep the door cracked. That's enough." I realized then that this was the first home I'd lived in where I didn't feel like I had to prove I deserved to be there. That's what they never gave me. They made me earn love. Fight for approval. Compete for scraps while my brother's shadow got to stretch across every inch of the house. But here, I didn't have to earn my place. I didn't have to keep my voice down or make myself smaller. I could take up space. I could speak loud and be heard. I could succeed and not apologize for it. Jamie's family still called often. His mom sent me care packages filled with things I didn't know I needed, her homemade ginger cookies, a handwritten recipe for stew, even a framed photo from our wedding I'd never seen before. His dad called one night just to ask how my job was going and then spent 10 minutes talking about a research paper I'd published. I cried after that call. Not the kind of crying I used to do, quiet, invisible tears in a locked room, but open, loud sobs while Jamie held me on the couch and whispered, "This is what it's supposed to feel like." A few days ago, I went through an old shoebox of letters, ones I'd kept even after everything. The ones I wrote to my parents over the years, birthday cards they never responded to, graduation invitations they never used, holiday greetings that went unanswered. I read them all, one by one, and then I did something I didn't think I'd ever do. I burned them. Every one. Not out of anger. Out of mercy for myself. Because those letters weren't written for the people they were addressed to. They were written by a version of me that believed love was something you had to chase. A girl who believed if she just said the right words, showed enough gratitude, stayed small enough, she might finally be enough. But I don't need that girl anymore. She got me here, and now I'm building something new. I've got a husband who sees me, not in spite of my strength, but because of it. A home that feels safe. A job that respects my voice. And maybe one day a brother who finally wants to know me, not as the rival our parents created, but as the sister who never stopped reaching, even when no one reached back. This isn't a happy ending. This is a beginning. And for the first time, it's mine.